Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, September the 6th, 2024. Ukraine. It's always a problem, isn't it? Because we want to know what's happening in Ukraine. And it's really very difficult to know what's going on there because you have got different views. I mean, the mainstream media has one view of Ukraine and what's happening and how events are unfolding, and there's another view in pro-Russian outlets and another view in independent outlets. So it's really, really difficult to know what is happening. And I'm just wondering if astrology can help. So a couple of days ago on September the 3rd, at I think it was just after 9 o'clock in the morning, there was a massive attack on the Ukrainian city of Poltava, and there was a training center, which I believe two Russian Iskander rockets hit this training center. Now, officially, 53 people were killed, and I think 298 were wounded. So that's quite a lot, but there is a view, certainly not in the mainstream media, firstly, that casualties were much higher. I've heard casualties of up to sort of 600 people. And that's not the whole story. There were apparently Swedish instructors there, and maybe potentially a lot of Swedish instructors. And this might have been connected with the fact that Sweden has donated two sort of AWACS, early warning systems or something like that, these planes which pick up what's going on in the sky around Ukraine and Russia. But it may have been connected with training for them, and there were trainers there. And, there is a suggestion, not in the mainstream media, that a lot of Swedes were killed. So how do we actually sort this out? Because, everyone is biased. But astrology might be one approach, plus a bit of history maybe, because it's interesting that Poltava is an important city in Russian history, because in 1709, the Russians beat the Swedes at a very important battle. Peter the Great, when he was expanding Russia, he defeated the Swedes, and it was a major defeat. I think it's regarded as the largest defeat in Swedish military history. So that is one point. So how do we work that out? So we would perhaps try to consider how this relates to Sweden's horoscope. I mean, was anything bad happening in Sweden's chart at the time? One might also consider the horoscope of the Swedish foreign minister, Tobias Billström. So Tobias Billström, he resigned on September the 4th, or he announced he was leaving his post on September the 4th, the day after this attack. I mean, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? I mean, it may just be a coincidence, but I thought it might be a good idea to look at his horoscope. And I also wanted to look at the horoscope of Peter the Great. One thinks about this war between Ukraine and Russia, and everyone talks about it's Putin, Putin, Putin. But is it really about Putin? Is it about the flow of Russian history? Would any other Russian leader be doing things any differently? If it was a Tsar, for example, or a democratically elected president, some would argue that Putin is a democratically elected president. Of course, those in the West say that he's sort of rigging everything. But if it had been, say, for example, the General Secretary of a Communist Party, would it be any different? So there is this tendency to personalize this conflict. But what about Peter the Great? I mean, I know that Vladimir Putin has a great admiration for Peter the Great, but what about Peter the Great? Was his invisible hand around? Could he be seen at the time of the this Iskander rocket launch, what would Peter the Great be thinking if he was just looking at this attack? Would he be pleased? Would he be thinking that Putin was doing a good job? And so, yes, I thought we would look at what's going on in Peter the Great's horoscope, even though Peter the Great has been dead for quite a few centuries. So that's what I want to do in this video, aside from looking at what's happening today, September the 6th, 2024. I also want to consider the AfD again very briefly, because yesterday I talked about the AfD, this right-wing German party, and I took the chart of their beginning as being a congress they had in 2013. But one of the commenters to my channel, Magic of Silence, suggested I got the wrong chart. I don't think it's the case that I got the wrong chart. Rather, I should have taken an earlier chart as well. And so I do want to look at that earlier chart, at that first meeting at which the AfD was formed, in a way as a manner of a correction. Okay, so let me now look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, September the 6th, 2024. Just a reminder, if you are not subscribed to this channel and you enjoy this video, I would of course be very grateful if you were to subscribe, and if you like this video, I would, yes, be grateful if you were to indicate that you do indeed like this video. So let's look at what's happening today. So as far as the thumbnail is concerned, by the way, there's a Swedish flag, and that is Tobias Billström, the Swedish foreign minister, or the former Swedish foreign minister, the one who announced his resignation on September the 4th. And at the top, you've kind of got a bit of a Iskander launch. That's a sort of rocket about to sort of go up in the air, or in the process of reaching its target. So let's look at what's happening today. So this is the picture. The moon is still in Libra. It's at 23 Libra. It's edging into the Via Combusta now. So what that means is the Via Combusta is a part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. Apologies if you've heard all this before. Every month the moon goes into the Via Combusta, so I sort of find myself explaining what the Via Combusta means. But to cut it short, it's a part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio where things can just happen that we weren't planning on. And so as the moon moves into the Via Combusta, we must make sure that we've got a plan B, and we shouldn't naturally assume that everything will work as expected. Now, that doesn't mean to say that things are going to go wrong. It just may be that we need to be flexible with the moon going through the Via Combusta. And there is a part of the Via Combusta which is in Libra, a part of the Via Combusta which is in Scorpio. Generally speaking, the Libra part of the Via Combusta is not as difficult as the Scorpio part of the Via Combusta. And one reason for that might be that the moon is at 23 Libra, which is quite close to the fixed star Spica, which tends to be quite fortunate. So moon in late Libra is not really a big issue. But always just have a standby plan just in case. Now, the moon in Libra does make a couple of aspects. It makes a trine to Jupiter, and it makes a sextile to Mars. So those two aspects are, I would have said, fairly fortunate. Moon trine Jupiter is quite lucky. It's about things going our way. And if we are optimistic, but also realistic, we've always got to balance optimism and realism, then we should be pleasantly surprised with the way things work out. I've just been talking about Via Combusta. I'm talking about things happening that don't go to plan, but it can work both ways. Something can happen which doesn't go to plan, but which nonetheless works in our favour, if we are flexible enough. And the moon also makes a sextile to Mercury. That's very nice, moon sextile Mercury. It's It's about communication. It's about how we can express ourselves. And ideally, it's about the mind and the heart being in sync with each other. So Mercury is more about our cognitions, and the moon is more sort of emotional. And when they come together, it means that we can often communicate in a sort of a natural, spontaneous way. Though moon is opposition Chiron. So with moon opposition Chiron, I suppose it's possible that there may be some sense in which we have to take things too far in terms of how we communicate. If you take Chiron as being the maverick, Chiron being about doing things that people weren't expecting, saying things that people weren't expecting. And so it just may be that some of the things we say are a little bit surprising. And I do think it's important that we express our individual views without much fear. Okay, there's always a situations where we need to keep our opinions to ourselves, but sometimes it's necessary to just shake things up a little. It really is. So that's really the main picture geocentrically, except for the fact that Venus is at... Where's Venus gone? Venus is at 9 Libra. So Venus at 9 Libra is on a fixed star, and that fixed star is called Vindemiatrix. So Vindemiatrix, according to Vivian E. Robson in the Fixed Stars and Constellations in Astrology, there's a legend to Vindemiatrix. He is the gatherer of grapes, represents Ampelos, the son of a satyr and a nymph, to whom Bacchus, in token of his fondness, gave a vine planted at the foot of an elm. While gathering grapes, Ampelos fell and broke his neck, whereupon Bacchus placed him among the stars as a memorial of his former affection. So we do have a hint there that this star Vindemiatrix may not be necessarily particularly fortunate, and we do get this idea, according to Ptolemy, it's of the nature of Saturn and Mercury, and it gives falsity, disgrace, stealing, wanton folly, and often causes its natives to become widows. So that's a little bit grim. So with Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix, maybe we have to be careful how we go. We certainly don't want to have an accident while picking grapes. And also, according to Robson, he talks about what Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix might be about. He says, trouble through love affairs, loss of friends, danger of scandal. So it's unlikely to affect us personally, but maybe we need to just make sure we look after our reputation. And yes, if we are gathering grapes or reaching for things, it's like, I don't know, if you're picking fruit, for example, there's that fruit that's just slightly out of reach, and one might be tempted to go out of our way to get that fruit, and in the process, I suppose one could have an accident. So yeah, be careful with fruit, picking blackberries, whatever you feel you might be doing, or just perhaps generally taking risks. And yes, do consider your reputation. So whenever you're doing something sort of in a public sense or saying something, you might have to consider what impact is it going to have. Though in general, I would have said that today is quite light in terms of activity. I mean, at least geocentrically, we're just moon, trine Jupiter, sextile Mercury, and Venus on Vindemiatrix. And in a way, that is just about it. Turning to the heliocentric solar system, putting the sun in the middle. Here it is. So heliocentrically, there's Mercury. Mercury is just going into Gemini. So Mercury is moving, does move quite fast heliocentrically. So Mercury is making a trine to Pluto. So with Mercury trine Pluto, it might be relatively easy to get our way. We might not have to try too hard if we need to sort of manipulate people, or if we're trying to get a message over. We can get that message over in a way that is somehow quite compelling. And also we have the Earth getting closer and closer to Saturn. Remember, Earth conjunct Saturn is the same as the Sun opposition Saturn. So it's just a reminder that it is getting very close, and Saturn is getting ever closer to the semi-square with Pluto. And I think that lineup is really starting to make itself felt. Saturn semi-square Pluto, with Earth involved with that. So over the next few days into the weekend, there is going to be a great sense of pressure. And I will be talking more about that in the video I put out tomorrow, in the weekend video. And Venus is opposition Mars. So Venus is at 16 Scorpio, and it is opposition Mars at 20 Taurus. Now, Venus opposition Mars, that aspect is not exact, but I think it's making its influence felt. And so Venus-Mars opposition can be about potentially people clashing. When people get close to each other, they start to realize their incompatibilities. Now, it's true that their incompatibilities can also be points of attraction, and it can at the same time be quite sort of explosive, like a sort of chemical reaction. I don't know, putting sodium in water, and something catches fire with Venus opposition Mars. And so if you're getting close to someone and you don't know them too well, you might discover new things, and these new things might not be to your liking. That is a possibility. Or it might occur to you that you actually find someone fundamentally repulsive. I mean, that is possible. So Venus and Mars can be a personality clash. And that's, I think, is all I want to say about the heliocentric picture. So I now want to move on to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, September the 6th, 2024. Aries. Aries, I think that things are moving quite well for you at the moment, and I think a lot of it has to do with just what's happening in the world and how people are relating to you. I think that at the moment you don't have to make much of an effort. Just things happen very easily, and I think in most cases you will be supported by other people. So you have to perhaps make some effort to have people in your life, and you mustn't think that you have to do things on your own. I mean, that can be a certain Aries tendency to feel that it's down to you to take the initiative. So it's kind of nice when you've got planets in Libra and you don't actually have to do anything. You can maybe start things off, make suggestions, but perhaps it's okay to let other people do the work. It certainly makes things a lot easier. And I also suspect that you can be quite lucky today, and that luck does come perhaps from your choice of friends and your choice of contacts, and the things you say will be noticed, and you don't have to speak with great power or conviction. I don't think that's necessary. Just say what's on your mind, and people will listen to you. And they'll have their own views and you can listen to them. So in many respects, it is quite an easy day. Now, I don't want to give the impression that it is completely easy, that there's absolutely nothing you have to do. Now, for one thing, Aries, you have a good sense of boundaries and you have a good sense of what is possible and what is not possible in perhaps quite a legalistic sense. You understand what the restrictions on your freedom are, and you also understand what the restrictions on other people's freedom is. And I think you can explain this very well. And so if you want to tell people how it is, perhaps quote law at them, quote chapter and verse. I mean, that may be what you feel you need to do. It's not a major theme for the day. I'm not saying you have to spend all day telling people what is right and what is wrong. Just there may be moments where you have to just explain the rules of the game. I mean, I know as an Aries, you don't like the fact that there are rules of the game because you value your own freedom. You nonetheless appreciate that the rules of the game do exist. And I think you'll be very good at explaining them. And if you are in a position of authority, I think that will be particularly useful. So what you can do is you can explain what is possible and perhaps what is required of other people, but in a way that I don't think is going to be offensive, that you're not going to come over as a control freak, because that's not what you're about. And certainly today, that is not what you're about. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, yes, in general, it is a good day. The moon is in Libra, your opposite sign, and you can relate very well to people. But there may be certain relationships which require a little bit of thought. And that might be connected with the fact that Venus, which is your relationship ruler, it's in Libra, very nice in Libra, but it is also on the fixed star Vindemiatrix. And so with that fixed star, which is not particularly fortunate, it may be that someone is perhaps feeling sorry for themselves or is doing something which is perhaps a little careless. And so ask yourself, is anyone being careless? And I'm thinking particularly of people close to you. Ask yourself, are they doing the right thing? Do you perhaps need to explain to them that they're taking too much of a risk? So that might be how Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix actually works. Also, from a heliocentric viewpoint, Venus is moving towards an opposition of Mars. And while relationships in a sort of fairly sort of casual way, if there's some distance between you and the other person, while that's fine, if you start getting really close to someone with that Venus-Mars opposition heliocentrically, then there could be problems. You might start to become aware of sort of incompatibilities. So when you're considering relationships today, do consider the issue of distance and where and at what kind of distance you should be to other people. You don't want to be very distant, because that's not what today is about. The moon is in Libra, which is a sort of relationship sign from an Aries perspective. But you don't want to be super close because of that Venus-Mars opposition heliocentrically, and perhaps also because Venus is on Vindemiatrix. But you want to kind of go for that mid-distance where you are reasonably close, but not so close that you get completely tied into other people's emotions, where issues of attraction and repulsion become important. You don't want to get that close. So a bit of distance would be good today, but not too much distance. Taurus. Venus is on the fixed star Vindemiatrix, and Venus is your ruler. And it may not be a big deal that Venus is on Vindemiatrix, but I just feel I have to point it out. So with Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix, we perhaps have to consider what could go wrong. One thing that could go wrong is that there may be mishaps, perhaps connected with overreach. I mean, I'm talking about literal overreach, trying to reach for something. You think you can get something, you can get hold of it, and you're almost there, and you just try a little bit too hard, and something goes wrong. Hence, what I was talking about with picking fruit, or I don't know, that feeling of trying to change a light bulb, which is just it's really high on the ceiling, and you can't quite make it, and maybe you need to stand on a chair or something, and that's perhaps where the trouble lies. Maybe I'm being over-imaginative there with Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix. Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix, there is also a reputational issue, as I was discussing when I was talking about Robeson's view on Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix. So whatever you're doing, consider how people are going to view it, and consider how people are going to remember it. And I suppose nowadays everything one does, there's a permanent record of it. So, for example, when I go to city council meetings and make a public comment, it's on YouTube straight away, and it's on permanent record forever. So do consider that. If you're saying something which is going to be permanently recorded, emails, of course, once you send an email, there's evidence of that forever, really, isn't there? Particularly with Gmail, which Gmail just has got this huge record. You send someone a Gmail, and that will, I suppose, be available forever, unless someone makes a special effort to delete it, and even then, you can usually get hold of it. So reputation does I think matter. So I had to sort of say that with Vindemiatrix, sort of get that out of the way. Now, aside from that, I think that today is probably quite useful, or at least you should try to make it useful, and to consider the practical side of things. I don't think that today is a day for doing things that are completely wild and fanciful. There are things that you want to do, you feel you'd like to do them today, and you perhaps don't want to do them tomorrow, in which case you should follow your instincts. And the moon is making a trine to Jupiter, and it's also making a sextile to Mercury. Now, these aspects are fortunate, and for you as a Taurus, I think they're not just fortunate, but they are useful. They can give you a sense of practical self-worth. You just feel, as soon as you start doing something, you feel that it's allowing you to get ever closer to realizing some of your short-term ambitions. But it may not be particularly spectacular. And it could be a good day financially, or in terms of your material life, because you can start to consider certain basic details which maybe you've ignored in the past, and by getting involved with these details, you will gain your own luck. And I think that through attention to detail, you will be creating good fortune for yourself. So I think overall today, I think is going to be fairly unspectacular, but I do think it's going to be useful. And I think also in a quiet kind of way, you can really boost your abilities. So if there's something you're trying to do or something you're trying to practice, then through practice, you can really make yourself even better. And, it's not just young people who can benefit through practice. I was listening to a view on Trump and his and the debate, and this was of course a fairly pro-Trump account of it, and there is a view that Trump has had lots of interviews. He's apparently he's had 35 interviews or something over the last couple of months, and Kamala Harris has only had one. And there is an argument that Donald Trump, through all of these interviews, he's actually practicing for the debate, and he may be how old is he? He's 78 years old. So this 78-year-old man is practicing, and every interview is helping him fine-tune his performance. So this could be a problem that Kamala Harris has. So, I know you probably don't, depends on your political views, but you may not want to use Trump as a role model. But there is the idea that practice can help, and you can improve yourself. It doesn't matter how old or how young you are, that through extra practice, you can boost yourself. And I think that is an aspect of today, that practicing something is useful whatever the situation. And I think that the concept of self-improvement for you at the moment is going to be very important. Yes, you might be able to do something well, but actually you can do it even better. Gemini. Moon continues to move through Libra, and the moon in Libra makes a sextile to Jupiter in Gemini. So that moon Jupiter, sorry, did I say a sextile? I meant a trine. The moon in Libra is making a trine to Jupiter in Gemini, and that does give you a real boost. It gives you a real sense of who you are, what you can do, and I think it makes you lucky. Moon trine Jupiter aspects do bring good fortune, and matters are helped by the fact that the moon is also making a sextile to Mercury. So moon sextile Mercury, moon trine Jupiter in fortunate houses, or when I say fortunate houses, Libra from a Gemini perspective is kind of in the fifth house, and the fifth house is about good fortune. It's also about enjoyment, and it's about creativity. And so that moon trine Jupiter, moon sextile Mercury, is going to perhaps put you at the top of your game as far as is possible. So do not doubt yourself from a creative perspective. Things are moving very nicely, and there's not much tension there. These are trines and sextiles. It's about your abilities being available to you really very easily. You don't have to try. And once you connect with your talents, it should be no problem projecting it outwards to the world at large. People will be able to see what you can do, and they can appreciate what you can do. So, Gemini, it's very important that you don't hold back, and you further benefit by the fact that, from a heliocentric view, Mercury is making a trine to Pluto. So, Mercury trine Pluto is about you having an influence and being able to change things, but it's a trine. It's not much of an effort. So if you don't like the way things are, you can just transform them in your own way. And I don't think that you're going to get much resistance. And I think, that is always, it's always good when there isn't much resistance. But if there's absolutely zero resistance, maybe there's some cause for concern. I don't know about you, but if something is really easy, if something is super easy, it just happens, then perhaps one's alarm bells should perhaps be ringing. Maybe it's easy because we're not doing it right, or perhaps we've sort of misunderstood the situation. So do consider an alternative view in whatever you're doing. You don't have to get obsessed about alternative views, but if you're doing something that is really working well for you, try to get some feedback. Okay, you don't need to get the feedback, but just getting an honest opinion from someone. Yeah, maybe someone serious like a Capricorn. Getting an honest opinion from a Capricorn, maybe if you're a Gemini, maybe that's something you can do. Or maybe from another Gemini. Geminis are quite capable of being critical, but getting an honest opinion from someone you trust, from a friend, but not someone who's just going to tell you what you want to hear. I think that could be very useful. But that doesn't take away from the fact that, today is, I think in most cases, should really be very easy. Things should run smoothly, and it is really a chance for you to really tune into what you're good at. Cancer. So Cancer, it may actually be a little bit of a changeover day if you're in the Americas. Well, you'd have to be on the West Coast, and you'd have to be up late. It's just that if you're in California, for example, or Alaska or Hawaii, then very late this evening, well, not necessarily that late this evening, but 11 in the evening or something like that. When is it? It's actually 10:18 this evening if you're in San Francisco, for example. The moon does go into Scorpio. So what I'm saying is, if you are on the West Coast of America and you're staying up late, there may be a change as the moon moves into Scorpio. And so if that means perhaps if you're going to a late night party and you're an American Cancerian, then maybe there might be some sudden excitement. But I think for most of us, the moon is not really going to go into Scorpio until tomorrow. So we have to perhaps regard today as being all about moon in Libra. So with moon in Libra, you probably feel that there's not a great deal that you want to do, unless it's something that you're very, very familiar with. Familiar ground really is going to matter today, I think, as it did yesterday. But you don't want to be in a situation where you waste opportunities, because I think there are opportunities, and that is because the moon, which is obviously very important to Cancerians, the moon is sextile Mercury and the moon is trine Jupiter. So moon trine Jupiter is a supremely fortunate aspect where you can benefit from something, perhaps in a quite unexpected way. But the question is, how are you going to benefit from it? I think that you don't have to be wildly ambitious or wildly sociable to benefit from that moon trine Jupiter. You can do something you enjoy in your own way. You don't have to shout about it, but it's still something that requires some concentration, and perhaps you need to be left alone to work it out in your own way. But once you get to grips with things, you can really start to see the advantages, and with your hard work you will see benefit. So that is one possibility. It also may be about things happening in strange ways. It could be dreams, it could be inspiration, it could be daydreams. It's just thoughts coming from nowhere. But these thoughts coming from nowhere, or maybe feelings coming from nowhere, really seem special. And if you're actually able to work on these thoughts and intuitions and inspirations, you can perhaps see that something quite amazing might be in the works. And it's really is nothing that has to be talked about or shouted about. In fact, Cancer, I think the less you say about it, the better. This is not something that has to be discussed, unless you're discussing it with people you really trust. And in this sense, work and activities that are secretive, that are behind closed doors, could be very beneficial. And so if you have the opportunity to stay at home, then maybe that's the right thing to do. But don't be too insular. If you're too insular, too focused on yourself, then you're not going to be able to make the most of what becomes available today. You do have to consider what is happening in other places. Even if you're not there, you have to keep a line of communication open, because you never know what might happen in terms of what happens out there. It might have an impact on you. It might be something you have to attend to. It might be an opportunity. And if you close down the lines of communication, then you'll be none the wiser. And I don't think that would be very healthy. So you've got to be present. You've got to have your phone on. You've got to be available. You've got to check your emails. But fundamentally, you can relax in your own world and relax and also do something useful and tune into your own luck, because I think it is a fortunate day when you can benefit from powerful insights and intuitions. Leo, like yesterday, you're going to be, I think, somewhat hasty. I think that you're going to be in a little bit of a hurry, and you're going to want to make things move as quickly as possible. But you might be perhaps in too much of a hurry, wanting things to happen too quickly. And as a result, you could get yourself into a situation where things get a little bit out of control. So, Leo, it might be a good idea if you just calm things down a bit. There isn't necessarily such a big hurry to get things done. And, in many cases, the emphasis should perhaps be on talking rather than acting. You might feel you're in a hurry, but what do other people think? Perhaps you should discuss things with them. Now, it doesn't mean to say you have to spend all day in conversation and reaching a stage where you do absolutely nothing. I suppose it is Friday, and sometimes there is a hurry to get things done because it's going to be the weekend. So you do have to take into account, your own timetables and your own targets. But still, a bit of discussion, a bit of conversation could be very useful, and it doesn't have to all be done at once. And you may benefit from the fact that the moon is trine Mercury, and the moon is sextile Mercury, and it is trine Jupiter. So that moon sextile Mercury is particularly useful because Mercury is in Leo. It's still in Leo and hasn't gone back into Virgo yet, or forward into Virgo yet. So moon sextile Mercury, you'll be an effective communicator, and with the moon trine Jupiter, even more so. You can express yourself in a way that is enthusiastic, and people are, I think, going to like what you have to say. And so you have to consider the many ways in which things can be done. You don't have to do everything on your own. You can get other people's help. How do you get other people's help? Well, you talk to them and you make people feel excited. And yeah, that is actually something you can do. You can make people feel excited about perhaps your own projects or about other things that you might be interested in. And so that is a positive. But maybe, Leo, you also have to consider what you're talking about and what you regard as being important. There's some danger that you focus on the wrong things. You might be talking about stuff which is relatively low level, relatively trivial. It's all about the details of things. And you're forgetting the big picture. And actually, the big picture does matter. You have to think about your broader goals. It's not just about achieving one small thing today. You have to ask, why are you doing what are you doing? What's it for? What's the purpose? And that is something you need to consider when you're trying to communicate to people. Ask about the big vision. The big vision really does matter, because if you don't have a big vision and you start to do things and they go wrong, then you could just give up because it all seems to be going wrong. Why are you doing what you're doing? You don't know why you're doing what you're doing, and it all fizzles. So having the big vision does matter, and so perhaps that's what you need to focus on today. And it's not about getting immediate results, but it's about working out what you want to do, then discussing what you want to do with others, getting their feedback, but always trying to keep in mind some larger vision of what you're trying to achieve. And that should be the way to proceed. Now, one aspect that I have been talking about over the last couple of days is this Sun opposition Saturn. And Sun is now less than 2 degrees from the opposition of Saturn. It's getting close. You're starting to feel it. And this Sun opposition Saturn means that there are probably going to be limits to what you can achieve in terms of other people. And it's true that you're going to have good social skills, that you'll be very communicative, you can get your message across loud and clear. But in a general sense, if you try to be very specific, if you try to focus on one person and one person's influence on you, when it starts to become specific like that, then maybe that's when the problems start, because of that Sun opposition Saturn. That Sun opposition Saturn is connected with close relationships, and it may be that you have to accept that someone else is not who you thought they were. Maybe they're too restrictive. Maybe they're just not as helpful as you thought they were. So there could be some disappointments in that department. So I would suggest with the Sun opposition Saturn, and I'll be talking more about it over the weekend, with the Sun opposition Saturn, that you don't put all your hopes in one person. Because if you feel that you're doing that, you think that one person could provide all the solutions to your problems, could provide the help you need, then I think you might be disappointed. You have to be more open-minded from that. You have to consider other possibilities. Because anyway, if you're putting a lot of hope on one person, that means you're putting a lot of pressure on them. And it's going to be very unlikely that they're able to deliver. And also this Sun opposition Saturn, close relationships of all kinds have to be treated with a certain amount of care, because there may be a stage where just something, I won't say goes wrong, but there's a little bit of a block, perhaps a communication block, and you just may feel that you can't do what you want to do. At the same time, the other person may find you maybe somewhat annoying. Yeah, I do consider that possibility. But in another person's eyes, you could be irritating. I mean, I know that sounds impossible, but it actually is possible. Virgo. So I was talking to Leo about a opposition between Sun and Saturn. And this opposition between Sun and Saturn, which becomes exact over the weekend, could well have an impact on you, because this Sun opposition Saturn is across the main axis of your chart. You've got Sun in Virgo moving towards an opposition of Saturn in Pisces. So that could be a real block. And as I was saying to Leo, you shouldn't put all your focus on another person, because that might lead to disappointment. You also have to consider what you want to do and how you want to do it. And it may be that if you have the wrong people around you, then you may be inhibited. You might just reach a point where just absolutely nothing moves. And so perhaps, Virgo, you should safeguard your own independence. Your independence matters, your independence of action. And if you start relying on another person, then I don't think it's going to work. And you might feel rather disappointed with the results. And having a freedom to do something spontaneously today is going to matter, because actually you can be spontaneous. I know that Virgo has a reputation for liking to do everything by the book and not causing too much trouble, but you can be spontaneous, and at least today you can be spontaneous, and you can be perhaps dramatically spontaneous. You can just do something, it just happens out of nowhere, and people will listen. So that's something that can happen. And from a heliocentric viewpoint, Mercury is trine Pluto. So in terms of getting people to listen, that's even better, isn't it? You can be somewhat manipulative, I suppose, if you need to be manipulative, but you don't have to make a big deal about being manipulative. You can just present the facts in a different way, and people will think, oh, that's interesting. Then you present them in another way, and maybe you can persuade people to do things your way. So yeah, you are persuasive, but you do need to keep moving in terms of other people. Don't focus on just one person. As I said right at the beginning, with that with Sun opposition Saturn, one person could bring everything to a halt. And so we're actually seeing certain similarities here between how Leo experiences the day and how you experience the day. But, okay, for different reasons. And we've also got a trine between the moon and Mercury and the moon and Jupiter. So that moon-Jupiter trine, I think, is potentially really useful, especially if you're doing anything connected with your ambitions. Whatever your ambitions might be, it doesn't necessarily have to be in terms of work or business, but you're going to have a clear sense of what you want and how you want to get it, and you will have a certain enthusiasm which people are going to like, and it may be a good idea to talk about financial possibilities. That's what people want to hear. Now, you may not be entirely convinced about some of your financial arguments, but if people hear about financial possibilities, they're certainly going to listen, and that may be a good hook. But there is a moral side to that, of course. You don't want to be in a position where you're over-promising. Now, Virgos are not known for over-promising, but today you could over-promise, particularly when it comes to money. Indeed, you could perhaps over-promise to yourself with Moon trine Jupiter. And so when it comes to financial projections, again, if financial projections are relevant, if there are any financial projections, then have a close look at them. I mean, it could be that you are on the receiving end of someone else's financial projections. Someone else is being very positive about money, not you being positive about money, but someone is thinking that things are possible. But you've got to be a Virgo. You've got to analyze what they're talking about, and you've got to really look at their calculations. And I think that you may then realize that someone is exaggerating. But from your perspective, if you are independent, if you are creating your own financial projections, it's important to be imaginative, and not imaginative in terms of estimating things, but imaginative about different activities, because different activities can bring profit and they can bring gain if you're open-minded. But then, of course, you have to be realistic. So you have to get the balance right. You have to be optimistic, but you have to also be realistic. And it's always a difficult balance for Virgos to do, because Virgos can be over realistic. They can just be so focused on the details, but they just can't see the big picture. But going back to that Moon trine Jupiter, it is a fortunate aspect, provided it's controlled. You don't want to get it out of hand. So Moon trine Jupiter out of hand has fantastic ideas about money and possible benefits, which in the end might not be realistic. And then we've got Moon sextile Mercury. That Moon sextile Mercury is more of a feature if you're in the Americas, but I think most of us are going to feel that sextile, and it's a fortunate sextile, but it's quite subtle. That is because Mercury is in Leo, quite a low-profile sign from a Virgo perspective, and so with Mercury in Leo, you can reach out to people, but in quite a sort of a low-profile, even secretive kind of way. So it might actually be a good day for talking to people in a fairly sort of secretive kind of way, where you don't have to tell the world about everything, and there may be a sense of planning. I mean, it's actually quite a good day for secret financial plans. If you find the right person to sort of link up with, and it is quite possible, because the moon makes a trine to Jupiter, then a sextile to Mercury, and so Jupiter does represent another person, perhaps another person who's got interesting ideas perhaps of a financial or business nature. And so might be a good idea for those kind of discussions, but they do have to be both secretive and realistic, because there's just always this danger of financial overexcitement today. Libra. Venus is your ruler, and Venus is in Libra. And on the surface, that sounds great that Venus is in Libra. Venus works very well in Libra because Venus rules Libra. But today, Venus is conjunct the fixed star Vindemiatrix. And I talked about Vindemiatrix when I was doing the reading for Taurus, because Venus rules Taurus. But also in a sort of general sense, I think all of us, regardless of our sign, could be impacted by Venus being on Vindemiatrix. And so with Venus on Vindemiatrix, there is some danger of overreach, perhaps physical overreach, just pushing yourself too far. Perhaps there's something you want. It could literally be fruits, as I was suggesting at the beginning of this video, reaching for fruits and overreaching and tripping up. Remember the mythology of the grape picker who breaks his neck picking grapes. That's what, apparently, according to Robeson, that's what Vindemiatrix is all about. So if there's something you want, something that looks attractive, and you just feel you have to go slightly out of your way to get it, then that might cause a mishap. And at the same time, there is an association between Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix and an impaired reputation. And we in fact get a double message about reputation, because at the moment, Venus, your ruler, is conjunct the South Node, and Venus is on Vindemiatrix. So Venus conjunct the South Node can undermine one's reputation. Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix, that fixed star, can undermine one's reputation also. So, Libra, do consider how people see you. And whatever you're doing, ask yourself, how is that going to be viewed? Not just today, but, over the next, few weeks. So I think it's just important that you think before you act, or even think before you speak, because something you say or something you do could undermine your reputation, and it might be remembered. People will notice. And so I don't want to make you too self-conscious, but that's something that maybe you should be considering. And of course, I'm probably exaggerating. Venus conjunct Vindemiatrix is not a particularly unusual event. It's going to happen, I suppose, on average about once a year. But do consider how you are seen, and if in doubt, then probably don't do it. I think that would be a useful strategy. Now, that's looking at things from a negative point of view. Now, from a positive point of view, the moon is moving through Libra, which is very nice. In fact, the moon is quite close to the fixed star Spica. Spica is a fortunate fixed star, and it is about being successful, and it's, I suppose, about being noticed. And the moon is actually trine Jupiter. So with moon trine Jupiter, moon in Libra, trine Jupiter in Gemini, I would have thought that you're going to be relatively fortunate, provided you behave yourself, and at the same time you can reach out for things which perhaps are beyond your normal boundaries. You don't have to restrict yourself today. In fact, you shouldn't be restricting yourself. because there are things that need to be discovered, and there are ideas that you need to engage with, not just sort of ideas, but ways of looking at the world. Sometimes one way of looking at the world is not complete, and you need to find something else out, and it may be that you need to seek out new information, and that means it's just important that you're not complacent. Yeah, you know a lot, but sometimes, Libra, your knowledge of things can be a little bit superficial. I'm not saying it's always superficial, but it may be that right now, Libra, you are aware that your knowledge about areas which are important at the moment may be too superficial, and that you therefore need to find ways of gaining access to new knowledge. And I think that is certainly available to you. And I think that's going to be important to you, because if you discover that you don't know something, or that you don't know something well enough, I think actually today that could have a big impact on you. You're going to suddenly think, this is no good. I need to do something about it. I need to inform myself. And so many Librans may want to gain access to new knowledge. They might want to also learn something new. I mean, I think that actually this concept of learning something new is actually part of a growing theme, and I think it's been part of a growing theme since perhaps the end of May, so for the last few months. And you're realizing that you've got some of the answers, but not all of the answers. So I think there is real possibilities here of self-improvement. Maybe there's not much you can do today, but it may be a note for the immediate future. So you perhaps see where there's missing knowledge, where there's missing experience, and you straight away have the impetus to do something about it. And maybe that's something you can start to address next week. Scorpio, you, I think, are still trying to work out quite a lot of things. It is very much a sense here of sort of work in progress. Scorpio, that things have changed, that things aren't the same as they were a few months ago, and that is starting to weigh in on you. But at the moment, there's probably not much that you can sort of do about it in a public sense, and you may just feel more comfortable when you are doing things in your own way, at your own pace. And indeed, Scorpio, you're capable at the moment of really quite incisive thought. You can look at things from afar, with a certain amount of objectivity, and you can really get to grips with them. I suppose it's that Scorpio way, isn't it? When Scorpios decide that something is important, they just give it everything they've got. And I think that is Scorpio is something you very much can do. You can really get to the bottom of the matter, and you can certainly ask yourself important questions. And you understand what questions need to be asked, and the answers, I think, are going to be available. But I don't think it's necessarily about you asking another person a question. It's really about you asking yourself questions and observing the world, observing people's behavior, observing what people say. And sooner or later, it's all going to start to make sense. And, at the same time, we've got Mars is in Cancer, and that has been a big change. And I think that Mars in Cancer for you, Scorpio, is by and large pretty fortunate, because it gives you the impetus to explore. it'll be exploration on your terms, not anyone else's terms. So I think that is really what perhaps is going on today. You're not really in the mood for being centre stage, though. If you happen to be in a position of authority, which I suppose you might be, or anyone is listening to you or trusting you, then it seems that you can be taken seriously. You'll give the impression of having just knowledge, and your knowledge will be listened to, and not just a knowledge about facts. It's also knowledge about what is possible and what is not possible. Sometimes people want to know what can be done. Can this really be done? Or are they kidding themselves? And Scorpio can just get to the heart of the matter very quickly. And today, you're particularly good at getting to the heart of the matter. And it's because you're able to combine emotional sensitivity with a good understanding of practical realities perhaps relating to rules, regulations, how laws are constructed. And in that sense, Scorpio, you're going to have a really good idea about what is possible and what is not possible, perhaps in a legal and an administrative way. So I don't know, if you're a Scorpio lawyer, I think that it actually could be a very good day for you. If you're involved with the law in any way, shape or form, I think that you're really going to know what's going on, and your advice will be precious. But at the same time, the moon is making this sextile to Mercury, and this moon sextile Mercury could affect Scorpios. I think will affect Scorpios perhaps in quite a beneficial way, and it may relate back to what I was saying about advice. I think you'll be very good at giving people confidential advice. So if you're in a position like that, where you can let someone know what they should be doing and what shouldn't be doing, but doing it in a way that is sensitive and where confidences are respected, I think you'll do a very good job. Or it may just be about yourself and your planning. The moon is in late Libra. Okay, it does go into Scorpio very late in the day if you're sort of in California on the West Coast, but I think for most Scorpios, it's a Libra day. And so there's something that you want to keep to yourself, but at the same time, you're engaging with the future. And so perhaps your plans for the future are starting to form, and it's all starting to make sense. And by next week, I think that you'll be ready to move things to the next stage. Sagittarius. Whether or not it's an easy day may depend on what you focus on. If you focus on the social aspect of things, just having a light and relaxing day, perhaps with friends, then I think that things should work very well. I mean, after all, we've got the moon in Libra, and the moon is making a trine to Jupiter and a sextile to Mercury. These are really easy aspects, and when you're with people and there isn't much of an agenda, even if there isn't, hopefully or preferably there isn't any agenda at all, then just everything is relaxed and everyone can have a good time. And so from a social perspective, I think that it should be fun, and you may feel that you're being appreciated, and the moon is fairly close to this fixed star Spica, which is a fairly fortunate influence. So you can be optimistic and happy, and you can just really, I think, feel that you're benefiting from other people's company. But that is somewhat light and trivial. I say feel that you can benefit from other people's company. I mean, that just might be an impression. I think that there is still some danger that you may spend too much time worrying about other people and getting involved perhaps in other people's trivia. Yeah, you might be enjoying yourself, but you might still feel that something is missing and that there's something you need to do for yourself. It's all very well thinking about other people, but they have their own priorities. Or maybe they have no priorities, but they're still taking up your time. And I think that you perhaps should try to consider other possibilities. Maybe you should make a special effort to look for the challenge. There is a challenge, certainly challenges today, but only if you look for them. If you don't want to be challenged, Sagittarius, then you don't have to be challenged. And you can just glide into the weekend in a free Sagittarian kind of way. So what about the other side of things? Well, the Sun is starting to make an opposition to Saturn. Now, it is true that this opposition between the Sun and Saturn is exact over the weekend, but we also have to bear in mind that it's Friday. Friday is the last day of the working week, I mean, for many people. And so with Sun opposition Saturn, there may be some focus here on your ambitions, what you are trying to achieve, the kind of achievements and aims that go beyond the sort of the triviality of your social life, maybe even the triviality of certain relationships. It's about what you are trying to do. And so I think that at the moment you are ambitious, and it's easy to forget this ambition temporarily, but it will come back. So perhaps you should consider your ambitions and the fact that when you really think about it, you perhaps understand that you may not have all the time in the world. Maybe you feel that there is an opportunity which is very close, and if you did nothing for a few days, you might lose that opportunity. And perhaps because it's Friday, the last day of a working week, you may feel that there is a certain amount of hurry here. But as soon as you start to think about what you want to do, not what other people want to do, what you want to do, then the resistance starts. Now that resistance may come from other people. It may come from your family. It may come from the fact that you have concerns which are all over the place. You're concerned about one thing, you're concerned about another thing, and there's a danger that you get nothing done. So here is the challenge. There is a challenge to perhaps confront what has been holding you back. I mean, you've been, I think, feeling that something has been holding you back probably for the last few days, but it's now becoming very clear. So what is it? And so maybe through your own strength of purpose, you can actually break the deadlock and really be able to put all your energy into something that is really very important to you, and be able to do this in such a way that everyone else understands. I mean, that is possible. Also, though, you may have to accept that some people don't like what you're doing, and you have to do it anyway. That really is possible. And with this Sun opposition Saturn, there could always be a psychological dimension here. I suppose from a psychological perspective, there may be some aspect of yourself that doesn't want you to be successful. And whatever this is, it's very apparent at the moment. So consider what is holding you back, and just consider the possibility that it could be an internal psychological process. But that's just one aspect of the day. We can't take away from the fact that the moon is trine Jupiter. Other people are there for you. If you don't allow them to take up too much of your time and energy, then other people can be a benefit. And with the moon making a trine to Jupiter and a sextile to Mercury, that does indicate that, as you move into the weekend, relationships, of all kinds can really blossom. You just have to make sure that they don't get out of control, and that you are considering your own needs and getting the balance right. So that's something to be sort of optimistic about. I mean, I suppose you could also ask, what kind of relationship is the best relationship? At the moment, you need people who have a view of the world that is different from your own. If you're with people who have a certain sameness about them, the same old people with the same old views, then maybe these are not the kind of people you should be mixing with or hanging out with, because it doesn't provide progress. It just provides comfort, and comfort without progress, what's the point? But there are people who have a different perspective, and I think that you can very much benefit from that perspective. And if you find people who have a different perspective and you trust them, maybe it's a time when you should be getting closer to them. Capricorn, you have a great sense of your place in the world. You, I think, at the moment are fairly ambitious, or at least you want to project yourself, projecting yourself perhaps to a wider environment. It's not a time to just spending all your time in sort of one place, doing one thing. That's not what you should be doing, because I think, Capricorn, fundamentally you are grounded, you are anchored, and because you are anchored, you can perhaps afford to move a little bit further than you had imagined, and you're not going to go too far. You're not going to take too many risks, but it's just important that you are noticed and recognized, because it's all available for you. And at the same time, Capricorn, it does seem that your social skills are actually going to be quite good at the moment. You are going to be able to express yourself in a fairly fluent way. Fluent because you understand what makes people tick, and you understand what people want to hear, and you don't really have to think about it too much. And if you want to get close to anyone, I don't think that should be a problem. It's a time where you can create oneness, perhaps through the power of your words. So you say something, and you can say something that the other person thinks, yeah, that's exactly what I want to hear. And you say more, and they say, yeah, this is the person. And so through your words and through your explanations, you can get people's trust, and yeah, certain people might actually think that you are the answer. So it does look like being a pretty useful day when you will just benefit through that just knowledge that you are anchored, and because you are anchored, yeah, you can perhaps go further afield than you were actually planning. Now, if you are doing anything connected with career or work or anything like that today, I suppose it is a Friday, then I think maybe a little bit of caution might be required, because Venus is on the fixed star Vindemiatrix, and there is a possibility that someone maybe tries to take something too far. It may be you taking things too far, but I suspect it will be someone else. And you need to think about what kind of impact that could have, because it could have a negative impact. And in a worst case scenario, there may be reputational damage. So something that happens at work, or perhaps is happening at work, if you're not careful, could have a negative impact on your image and perhaps even your reputation. But it needn't happen. I think you have to ask yourself about optics. What are the optics of what is going on at work or in your business? If you have a business, how are people perceiving your business? And if something is out of control, then that could be very damaging. Or it just might be about overreach, trying to do something which is just a bridge too far, and it goes wrong, and people notice that it goes wrong, and that could undermine you. So in that sense, Capricorn, there may be a situation where you have to show some restraint, or maybe you have to restrain other people if you're not restraining yourself. So try to think things through and to sort of model things in your mind. How are they going to work out? And you might then realize that you need to hold back a bit. I mean, not for very long, but it would just be a pity if something got spoilt on a Friday, just as things were working. Things have gone well, but you just take them one step too far, and that could cause a fair amount of damage. So, sorry to end on a cautious note, but I mean, I suspect that in most cases it's not going to be relevant. I think that overall it looks like being a good Friday. Oh, so it's not a good Friday, but it looks like being a Friday which works to your advantage, and it's a good idea to be ambitious, but not too ambitious. Aquarius, we've got a lot of activity in air signs at the moment. Jupiter's in Gemini, we've got Venus and the Moon in Libra, and so that means from an Aquarian perspective that things should be, by and large, working pretty well, and you'll find that things aren't too difficult, particularly in a general sense. If other people are not closely involved, particular individuals, yes, could be a problem. But if everything is done in sort of a general sense where no one individual matters, then yeah, things do run smoothly. Because you've got Jupiter is in Gemini, and it's making a trine relationship to Aquarius, your sign, and Venus is in Libra, again trine relationship between Venus and Aquarius, not to mention the fact that the Moon is in Libra. So things certainly do seem to be running smoothly. And I think that there could be a certain sense of excitement that you're able to use your talents and you're being appreciated and people like what you're doing, and at the same time things aren't boring. I mean, Aquarians don't really want things to be too boring. Aquarians do want to be excited. They do want new knowledge, new information, and all of that is available to you. So I think it can be quite a fun Friday where things are moving. Yet we can't avoid the fact that the Sun is getting ever closer to Saturn. And I have been talking about the Sun-Saturn opposition over the last couple of days. And the Sun opposition Saturn, Saturn is your ruler. And the Sun is starting to make that opposition to Saturn. So you're starting to be aware of something that you don't entirely approve of, or there may be a certain sense of distrust, and you're wondering whether you can get out of it. And it may well be another person, a person who is quite capable of making things complicated. And the question is this a confrontation that you need? Sometimes a confrontation actually is necessary. Some people just are not going to go away. They're always going to be there. And if there's an uneasy relationship with them, it's not going to get any better. And sometimes a confrontation is the way forward. So, consider what's happening at the moment in your life and see and ask yourself, is there a confrontation brewing? And if a confrontation can't be avoided, then I suppose you just have to go through with it. But at the same time, you do have to avoid anything that creates needless complications. Now, some people like complications. They want to make very simple things into a complicated mess. That's the way they like it. And if you're in that kind of situation, then maybe you should stay away from such influences, at least in a short term, because this Sun-Saturn opposition, it's going to be exact over the weekend. So next week the Sun will be moving away from an opposition of Saturn. So it may be that then people you can't deal with now, you can deal with them perhaps next week. So perhaps Aquarius, there are certain people you need to temporarily avoid. And also these people could be trouble. Some people are accident prone. They bring with them a sort of a cloud of disruption and chaos, and it's particularly bad at the moment. And if you let this cloud pass, then next week you'll be in a better situation to deal with it. So you do have to consider the best way of dealing with the situation, but it should not take away from the fact that today should be fun. It's a day when you can enjoy yourself and when you can start to see new opportunities, and there is a certain sort of vibrancy in the air, and you shouldn't have to put too much effort into things, unless of course you want a confrontation. And as I've already said, in that case, if you want a confrontation, then that's going to, I think, need some preparation. Pisces. So Pisces, you do feel that things continue to be a little bit complicated. You understand that. I mean, I suppose it helps the fact that you're a Pisces, and Pisceans, they tend to understand the emotional dimension, and They understand that you can't live on at a surface level, not for very long. Particularly if you're a Pisces. If you're a Pisces, you can't spend all your time above the water, above the surface of the water, because that's not where you belong. Pisceans belong in the water. Pisceans belong in the emotional stream, and in the emotional stream they pick up everything, and they do understand how complicated things are, that you just cannot just focus entirely on things that are taking place on the surface. But it might be complicated, but doesn't mean to say it can't be also very satisfying. We have a trine aspect between the moon and Jupiter. Of course, Jupiter is your ruling planet. You've got moon trine Jupiter. So that means that Pisces, you should have no difficulty bringing to bear your feelings, and your feelings are powerful, and you can, I think, gain new insights into how to make an impact. Now, there are many ways of making an impact, and I suppose one normally sees making an impact as being about making, I don't know, some kind of dramatic gesture. That's how we normally see it. But right now, you can make an impact without drama, just by being yourself. And so don't underestimate the power of your own presence. And you can be completely present in a place where no one can see you, because your influence is going to be felt. You are connected. You are very, very connected, even if it doesn't feel that you're connected. And if you want something to happen, perhaps it's just a matter of willpower. You tell yourself that you want it to happen. You feel that you want something to happen. You don't even have to verbalize it. And the universe will just understand. And I think that's how it should work. Now the question is, how do you relate to other people? And the big aspect coming up is an opposition between the Sun and Saturn. And I have been making a rather big deal about this Sun-Saturn opposition. I do think it's important for a number of the 12 signs, you included. And as I think I said yesterday, that the Sun is in Virgo, which is your opposite sign, and it's making an opposition to Saturn, which is in Pisces. And so you're very aware of how other people can have an impact on you. You're also very aware of how you can have an impact on them. And it may be a situation where you at first feel that you don't have the advantage. So if you're in a conflict situation, you may underestimate yourself. You may think that the other person has the cards. But actually, this is not true. With the Sun opposition Saturn, I would say that Saturn is the stronger planet. And the reason Saturn is a stronger planet is because Saturn is in mutual reception with Venus by exaltation. Venus is in Libra, which is the exaltation of Saturn. Saturn is in Pisces, which is the exaltation of Venus. And so with that Sun opposition Saturn, I see Saturn probably as being you. Even though the ruler of Pisces is Jupiter, it's just because Saturn is in Pisces. And so if there's any form of conflict, you're the one in the end who is going to win, I believe. And I understand it might not feel like that. I mean, the only reason you could lose is I suppose, because you underestimate yourself. You may be in a kind of poker-like situation where you've got your hand, someone else has got their hand, and you might just naturally assume for some reason that the other person's hand is stronger than yours. And if you made that assumption, I think you'd be wrong because of that mutual reception between Venus and Saturn. So what I'm saying is, Pisces, your hand is stronger than you realize. And if there is a conflict brewing, then I'm fairly confident that you're in the end going to be the winner, provided you see it through and you don't back down. Of course, I'm not talking about conflicts which are about violence or about very, very serious issues. If it's about very, very serious issues, you shouldn't really follow my advice. You've got to sort of get alternative forms of advice. But in a general sense, I think your hand is stronger than the other parties. And that's it. That is my forecast for the 12 signs. And now I'm going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 40, deliverance. So this hexagram, deliverance, gives us the idea of escape. We're in a situation that we're not comfortable with, that we're not happy about, and we have a chance to get out. And it may be a last chance. So we have an opportunity. We can take this opportunity and there'll be a great sense of relief. Or if we don't take the opportunity, then we may be stuck. So I suppose consider what is going on in your life at the moment. Are you happy with everything? Is there a situation that you're not happy with and you just want it all to go away? Maybe it's a social situation. Maybe there's someone you're spending time with or someone who is demanding a lot of attention and you really don't want anything more to do with them. But now is a good chance if you feel you want to sever a relationship. Or it could be some agreement you've made, and you've made the agreement, you feel you don't really want to break the agreement, but you're feeling more and more uncomfortable about it. And maybe with this hexagram 40, you actually have a chance to break it. Okay, no one's going to be happy about it, or people you might get a lot of flack, but it might be the right thing to do. So if there's something you want to end, then now might be the chance to end it. And if you leave it much longer, it could be too late. And there are 3 moving lines here, and the second line moves, and the second line is very proactive. It's saying, yeah, there's a problem here. Something's not right. We can deal with it. We can deal with it now, and we can deal with it effectively. And so that's a good way to start. And I'm guessing that in the end, you might conclude that having focused on the problem, you can then decide that the answer is to cut yourself free from something or someone or a particular situation that you're feeling uncomfortable with. Then we have a third line. The third line moves, and the third line is, I don't know, it's kind of a little bit set aside from the rest of the message. It's kind of saying that there is someone who is not particularly well off. When I say well off, I mean well off in terms of talents, abilities, status, whatever it is. But they have airs and graces. Now, who has airs and graces? Someone feels that everything is fine and they can start to act beyond their station. Now, that might be someone you are dealing with, and it may have some relevance to this concept, but you have to escape. You have to escape from something. Maybe you're dealing with someone who is not quite as qualified as they claim, and they are perhaps working above their pay grade, so to speak. Now, that could be you, in which case, in terms of deliverance, it's about you accepting that you have taken things too far, that you've perhaps had your own airs and graces, you thought you could accomplish something, you thought you could deal with something, but now you're beginning to realize, hold on, you're out of your depth, and if this carries on, you could lose everything. So it could be you, but it could be someone else. It could be perhaps someone else you may be negotiating with, or someone who's offering you something, and you're starting to think, this person is not as qualified as they're claiming. This person does not have the abilities that they claim to have. And again, the answer to that would be to get rid of them, to cut it. And then we have the top line moving, and the top line moving is about seeing a problem, seeing, if you like, the guilty party, someone who is fundamentally evil in I Ching language. I mean, I don't mean evil necessarily really evil, but someone who is up to no good, and perhaps someone you need to escape from. And you see that someone is up to no good, and you've got them. You actually see what they're doing, and then you can just shoot them down. I don't mean literally shoot them down. Of course, the imagery that the I Ching likes to use is seeing a hawk and shooting the hawk. And that seems to me a terrible image, because you don't want to shoot hawks. But it's someone who is evil, or someone is up to no good. You see them, and because you see them, you've got them, and you can get rid of them. You can bring them down to earth. And then this hexagram deliverance, it transitions to hexagram number 56, which is the wanderer. And so the way I would see this is that what's happened is that you've understood that a situation was fundamentally no good. It was perhaps a situation that you were maybe quite committed to, but you've realized that it wasn't helping your interests, and so you're letting go of it. You've escaped. And in that moment of escape, you are the wanderer. You do feel a bit uncertain. Where are you? You've lost your ties to the world. At least that's how it feels. And you are at a loss. But it's not going to last for long. You have to be the wanderer for a time, because you've just got rid of something. And there is a certain sense of emptiness. But you did the right thing, and then the task of a wanderer is to find home, and that's something that in the end you will do. You will find home, you will find security, and in the end you're going to be very relieved that you were able to get out of a very bad situation. Okay, so I now want to go back to the astrology, and yes, I wanted to look at this attack on Poltava and how it relates to the past and how it relates to Sweden. But first of all, I very briefly wanted to go back to what I was talking about in my previous video, and that is the AfD, this sort of right-wing party in Germany, and which had just had this electoral success in Thuringia and Saxony. And one of the commenters on this video, on yesterday's video, Magic of Silence, suggested I'd got the wrong chart, that I was mistaken. I was I don't think mistaken in terms of looking at the chart of a Congress, because there was a Congress, I think, in April 2013. But I think I was mistaken in terms of looking at the real genesis of the AFD. And in fact, the AFD was formed on February 6, 2013, and that's when the announcement was made. So let's look at that chart. So here's the foundation chart of the AFD. So it was actually February 6, 2013 when the AFD came into being. And I've set this for Oberrussel in Germany. And I don't know what time it was, but I did read one report. It was in the evening. So I've gone for 6 p.m. I don't know, it might have been 7 p.m. But so the ascendant was probably Leo, but it could be Virgo. And the moon at 6 p.m. was at 29-27 Sagittarius. So the moon is either in Sagittarius or Capricorn. So I would have thought as the meeting progressed, the moon would have been going through the first couple of degrees of Capricorn. So maybe one should regard the AFD as having the moon in Capricorn. So moon in Capricorn, it does provide a certain seriousness to the organization, moon in Capricorn. I know that the moon is in its detriment in Capricorn. So that can be a bit unpleasant with moon in Capricorn, and its moon is, I suppose, slowly moving towards a conjunction to Pluto. And you'll notice about this chart, the AFD foundation chart, because I suppose that it was founded in the evening, you're going to have a lot of stuff in the 6th and the 7th house. And so the 7th house, if I take the 6 p.m. chart, you've got Mercury, Mars in the 7th house. So you're going to have perhaps a situation where there's a lot of projection, that there is a tendency, I suppose, to project one's own concerns onto the outside world. So, you perhaps see all one's problems in terms of immigrants or the European Union or whatever else you want to complain about, or the euro. So there is projection there. That's true. And maybe we've got Saturn on the IC, perhaps, but we don't know what time. At least I don't know what time this meeting started or when the AFD actually came into being that evening. And we do have Sun in Aquarius, and Sun in Aquarius has been this theme which sort of keeps cropping up, doesn't it? The Sun in, we've had the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in 2020, which was in Aquarius. So Aquarian things are going to become prominent, particularly with Pluto now on the verge of moving into Aquarius, and following on from that Jupiter Saturn conjunction in January. It's true that the Nazis came to power on January the 30th, 1933, when the Sun was in Aquarius. That doesn't mean to say that the AFD is anything to do with the Nazi Party. I mean, I know a lot of people like to make that connection, but I think that might be something of an exaggeration. Notice that the AFD has got Jupiter in Gemini, so it's kind of fitting that Jupiter in Gemini, Jupiter is in Gemini now, and Jupiter is in Gemini at the time of their success in Thuringia and Saxony. So I don't think I want to say much else about this chart, because I'm really doing this as in a sense as a correction. But one interesting thing is that one of the co-leaders of the AFD is Alice Weidel, and I don't know if I pronounced that right. And here's the Alice Weidel's chart. So Alice Weidel was born on February the 6th, 1979. So the AFD came into being on Alice Weidel's, let me get this right, on her 21 plus 13, on her 34th birthday, have I got that right? So on on Alice Weidel's 34th birthday, the AFD came into being. And I think that is a very interesting connection. And if we look at the synastry between AFD and Alice Weidel, obviously they've got their sons. Both their sons are pretty much in the same place. Alice Weidel has her moon in Gemini, so she's chiming with the AFD's Jupiter in Gemini. So I thought that was an interesting coincidence. And Alice Weidel has her Venus in Capricorn. Venus at 1 degree 11 Capricorn. I don't have a time of birth for Alice Weidel, but the moon was moving into Capricorn as the AFD was being founded. So the moon of the AFD is right on Alice Weidel's moon. So, right on Alice Weidel's Venus. So that's a perfect connection, isn't it? She's got Venus in Capricorn. That's very much who she is, because she's a woman. She's not projecting her Venus, I don't think, and so she is, in many respects, Venus in Capricorn, and she is conjunct. Yeah, she's conjunct the AFD's moon in Capricorn. So I thought that was interesting. I mean, I'm sure I'll be looking at the AFD's chart in future videos, but thanks again, Magic of Silence, for correcting me. So then there is the attack on Poltava. So Poltava is a city in Ukraine, and it's famous for this battle in 1709 on the new style. I think it was on July the 8th, 1709, and at the Battle of Poltava, Peter the Great defeated the Swedes, and it was Sweden's most dramatic military defeat, and it laid the foundations for, I suppose, for Russia's expansion, I suppose, to the south and to the west, and it was a very important battle in terms of the history of Russia. And Poltava has come up again, and there was a massive attack on a military training center in Poltava, and here is the horoscope for the attack. I think it happened at around 9:08 a.m. So what happened was two Iskander missiles hit a military training center, and the Ukrainians say that at least 53 people were killed and at least 298 were wounded. There is a view that the casualty levels are much higher, and this is always a problem if one's looking at a Ukrainian source. You can't necessarily trust a Ukrainian source. I mean, if we look at the history of Ukraine, information coming from Ukraine, it tends to be unreliable, even though the mainstream media likes to take it at face value. And so it's possible that up to 600 people were killed or wounded as a result of this attack. And in particular, it seems that some Swedish instructors were killed, or possibly were killed. It depends who you look at. I mean, what sources you use. And perhaps this is part of what I'm trying to consider and explore. And it's because Sweden has provided these AWACS planes to help monitor the sky, and it was all about the training, and there were Swedish instructors. We don't know how many Swedish instructors. There are suggestions, but there were a lot of Swedish instructors. I don't know. One only has, one looks at Ukrainian sources, which is, in other words, the mainstream media. They take what the Ukrainians tell them at face value usually, and then you've got sort of pro-Russian sources, and then you've got neutral sources. So anyway, this is the chart of the attack, and I think it's fairly accurate. It said 9:08 a.m. and it happened just after a new moon. And this new moon is absolutely critical. So this new moon was at around 11 Virgo. And so if you look at the chart at face value, you possibly don't see anything especially dramatic. Okay, you might see Pluto on the IC. I mean, it's not exactly on the IC, but it's still there. I mean, it's that says something about it. I suppose destruction coming from, well, it's destruction coming from above. It might be better if Pluto was on the midheaven, but a building was completely destroyed, or almost completely destroyed. So we also have Mars square Neptune. Remember we were talking a lot about this Mars square Neptune. I was talking a lot about Mars square Neptune. And so here is, there's Mars at 2904 Gemini, and Neptune is at 290 Pisces. So Mars was exactly square Neptune at the time of this disaster. And I think it was a disaster, certainly for Ukraine. I mean, I know that there have been some very big hits, both sides, Ukrainian and Russians hitting each other, but I think this attack was particularly dramatic. And so Mars square Neptune, okay, it wasn't a water disaster, but it certainly was disastrous. So in order to understand this chart, it's a good idea to look at it in terms of the 90-degree dial. So remember, the 90-degree dial is you create a special chart where all the conjunctions become conjunctions, oppositions and squares become conjunctions, and semisquares and sesquiquadrates become oppositions. So we're looking at the same chart, but we're looking at the same chart in a different way. And here is the 90-degree dial for this chart, and I particularly want to look at the moon. And the moon, by the way, I should say that the moon, if you look at the moon is on the ascendant midheaven midpoint. So in this chart, so the ascendant and the midheaven is the time and the place. So yeah, you don't see a dramatic chart, but you do see the moon is on the ascendant midheaven midpoint. Now, the moon on the ascendant midheaven midpoint in itself doesn't say much about the event. It doesn't talk about destruction, I wouldn't have thought. But turning back to the 90-degree dial, we want to see what midpoints the moon is on. So there I put the pointer on the moon, and so the first midpoint we see, but the moon is actually on the Sun-Saturn midpoint. So there you can see it's pretty close to the Sun-Saturn midpoint. So the Sun-Saturn midpoint, according to this, was at 1350 Gemini. So the moon at was it 1340 Gemini was pretty close to the Sun-Saturn midpoint. And there is the ascendant midheaven midpoint. So you can see the ascendant midheaven midpoint, which is at 1331 Virgo. So the moon exactly on the ascendant midheaven midpoint. So Sun-Saturn suggests that's not great. Then we move to the key midpoint. There's a Mars-Neptune square. You see, because it's a 90-degree dial, it's displayed as a conjunction. And there is Uranus. So the moon is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and it's on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. And so I think that really does give us the idea, if we look at the structure of the midpoint of the moon for the attack on Poltava, it's actually pretty dramatic, but you just have to get this X-ray vision of the attack by looking at the 90-degree dial. So moon on the Sun-Saturn midpoint, on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint, and on the ascendant midheaven midpoint. That really does start to give us an idea that really something dramatic happened at that time. But how does this chart relate to Sweden? So we have this theory that there were a lot of Swedish instructors there. So if there were a lot of Swedish instructors, we would expect that to show up, wouldn't we? We would expect to see Sweden in the chart. So let's have a look at Sweden's horoscope. So here's Sweden's chart. I don't know about the time of birth for Sweden. There is a source that says it was 1130, but I don't know. And so Sweden celebrates its independence on, by the way, it says June the 16th, 1523. Don't worry about that. The software likes to convert things from Julian to Gregorian. Don't worry, I have got the right date for Sweden's independence. It's just that the date shown on this chart may be different from what it actually is. So here's a horoscope of Sweden. And I'm particularly interested in all these Pisces planets. There's a load of Pisces planets, and there's Mars conjunct the South Node. And so how does it fit? So I put Sweden's horoscope in the middle, and I have put the Poltava attack on the outer wheel. And what is kind of incredible is the South Node. The South Node is, Sweden's South Node is at 1116 Virgo. So 1116 Virgo arguably represents the past. You know, when we think about this war in Ukraine, it is so connected with the past, isn't it? Nations have this sort of collective memory. I'm sure in Sweden's collective memory is the fact that Russia defeated them in the 18th century. I'm sure they haven't collectively forgotten that. You know, Sweden has been neutral for a long time, and it's now broken its neutrality and joined NATO. And there's its South Node in Virgo, South Node conjunct Mars. And so the Sun at the time of that attack was on Sweden's South Node. In fact, there was a new moon a few hours before that Iskander attack, and that new moon was on Sweden's South Node. So this is very much about Sweden's past. And so I think that in terms of Sweden with that South Node, I do think that we are seeing some kind of connection there. And if you look at Sweden's natal chart, independence chart, it's got South Node, and it's got a North Node. It's got a Saturn North Node conjunction, and so the new moon at 11 Virgo was opposition Sweden's South Node, North Node Saturn conjunction. So I think that's I would have said quite an interesting connection. It's quite an interesting lineup. So there is perhaps a connection between Sweden and this attack. And then the day after the attack, the Swedish foreign minister resigned. It was apparently completely unexpected. So Tobias Billström, who's the Swedish foreign minister, or was the Swedish foreign minister, here is his horoscope. I don't know his time of birth. He was born on December the 27th, 1973. And so why did he resign? I mean, that is a good question. I mean, did you ever watch The Prisoner? Always asking the prisoner, number 6, why did you resign? That's always a question. Why did you resign? But I don't know why he resigned. Maybe he resigned because of the shock of this attack in Poltava. Maybe, that's possible. So how does the Poltava attack affect Tobias Billström's chart? And so we've got Tobias Billström's in the middle, and we've got the attack on the outer wheel. So Mars, at the time of the attack, remember there was a Mars-Neptune square. So that Mars was right on his south node. I think it was within a degree of his south node, and he has Saturn. In fact, he has south node conjunct Saturn in his chart. Saturn is at 0 degrees Aries, so south node is at 28 Gemini. So Mars was sort of on his Saturn node midpoint, but then you also look at his Mercury. He's got Mercury at 28 Sagittarius and Saturn at 0 degrees Cancer. So he's got a Mercury-Saturn opposition. So a Mercury-Saturn opposition, okay, that is quite serious, serious-minded, someone who can study well. I think he has a master's degree from Cambridge in history. So I'm sure he can focus his mind. But Mars-Saturn Mars-Saturn opposition can be moments of depression, moments of hopelessness. And so this Mars, at the time of the attack, was on his Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So Mars on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint can represent some form of devastation, something happening which he wasn't really expecting. I mean, just to give you an idea about what Alfred Witte says about Mars on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. Just see, I haven't looked it up, so I have no idea whether it's relevant. So Mars on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. This is interesting. To be separated through quarrel or dissension, a trip that has to be made. Maybe that was Swedish advisors going to Poltava. It was a trip that had to be made. Bad time to force issues. News brings worry. I think that's probably it. I mean, I don't know for sure, but we do have evidence looking at his chart that he was perhaps personally devastated by this attack in Poltava, which might indicate that there were more Swedish advisors than the mainstream media is telling us. And at the same time, look at the North Node. The North Node was at 641 Aries. So he has Pluto at 647 Libra. So the North Node was opposition his Aries. Sorry, North Node was opposition his Pluto. So with North Node opposition his Pluto. Okay, Pluto is a transpersonal planet, and for ordinary people, maybe it doesn't matter. But if you're Foreign Minister of Sweden, then your Pluto does matter. And so North Node opposition Pluto, as Reinhold Ebertin says about Pluto North Node contacts, is about the tragic destiny of a large group of people. So I think there is evidence here, I'm not saying it's true, that firstly, Tobias Billström resigned because of the Poltava attack, and secondly, by implication, that there were more Swedes than the mainstream media were telling us at the site of the attack, and maybe higher ranking Swedes. You know, we've had stories about whole delegations being killed. I don't know if that's true. So that's Tobias Billström's chart. Then let's just go back to history. The Battle of Poltava. So this was the Battle of Poltava, using the Gregorian calendar, July the 8th, 1709. I think the Swedes surrendered at around 7 p.m. On that day. I don't know how well we can sort of trust this chart, but at the Battle of Poltava, the South Node was at 11 Virgo. So the new moon was on the South Node at the time of Poltava. And looking at the time of the how did the Battle of Poltava affect Sweden? So there's a Swedish chart, and here's the Battle of Poltava in 1709, and there is the South Node at 11 degrees Virgo. So in fact, Sweden had its South Node return when it lost the Battle of when it lost the Battle of Poltava. So we know, I think, that 11 degrees Virgo is a very sensitive area for Sweden, and so we had that new moon at 11 degrees Virgo on September the 3rd, just a few hours before the Poltava attack, and it really hit the country. So it could be that, in some respects, for Sweden, it is a military defeat, what happened in Poltava a few days ago. And finally, let's just be completely far-fetched. Let's look at the horoscope of Peter the Great. So Peter the Great was obviously one of Russia's greatest Tsars, and he greatly expanded Russia. He defeated the Swedes, I think, at two battles. It was a Battle of Narva and the Battle of, I think it was the Battle of Narva 1698 or something, I don't know. The 1709 was definitely the Battle of Poltava. And so what about Peter the Great's chart? And how does Peter the Great feel when he sees this Iskander attack? What would his opinion be on it? Because we do tend to sort of personalize this Ukraine conflict. It's all about Putin. But I just suspect it's not about Putin. I just think if anyone had been in control of Russia, they'd be doing the same thing. But so here's Peter the Great's chart, and I'm going to do, for him we do have a time chart. So here is Peter the Great, and in inner wheel we have Peter the Great's chart. On the outer wheel we have the two Iskanders hitting Poltava. And what is kind of amazing, almost a little bit creepy, is that Peter the Great, in his horoscope, he has a conjunction, a very close conjunction, between Jupiter and the South Node at 10 degrees Virgo. I mean, not quite 11 degrees Virgo, but it's there. So the Sun was crossing his Jupiter, the new moon was on his Jupiter South Node conjunction. So in a way, maybe he's sort of coming back from the past, maybe Peter the Great wants his stuff back, even though he's been dead for quite a few centuries. And you might be interested to know that, we do have a fairly close time of birth for him. It says 1 a.m. But so the North Node was crossing is at the moment is crossing Peter the Great's ascendant. So, also Mars is, at the time of the attack, Mars and Neptune were moving to the conjunction of his Mercury. So maybe Peter the Great is sort of, I don't know, through that Mars square Neptune, he's kind of communicating from beyond the grave, but maybe I'm just fantasizing. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about this Iskander attack. I'm sorry to have been so far-fetched. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it, and if you enjoyed it and you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.